Aradhana Singh. Aradhana is currently a PhD candidate in ancient Indian history at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her doctoral research investigates the representations of love in early Sanskrit literature based upon a reading of texts belonging to different literary genres. Her research interest includes fields of history of emotions, legal history, gender, sexuality, literary representations, and cultural studies in the context of early Indian history. Take it away, Aradhana, 20 minutes.
Good afternoon to all present here today. Thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. My paper is titled Social Construction of Daṇḍa, Punishment, and Prāyaścitta, Penance in Early India. Before I begin, I would like to point out that I do not have a background in law per se, but I'm trained as a historian. So I basically trace the historical context in which these two doctrines developed. In the present paper, I intend to explore the social construction of the punishment-penance binary in early India and its implications in understanding how law interacted with two important social categories of gender and caste in those times. This study is strongly based on the assertion that law is the outcome of the socioeconomic conditions of a particular country and the expression of its intellectual capacity for dealing with these conditions. Law in early India was much wider in concept than today, as it also covered the fields of morality and enforcement of duty. The corresponding Sanskrit term dharma, derived from the root dhri, encompasses law, ethics, religion, duty, social obligations, and justice within its wide semantic spectrum. P.V. Kane defines dharma as the privileges, duties, and obligations of a man, his standard of conduct as a member of Aryan community, as a member of one of the castes, as a person in a particular stage in life. It is in this context, therefore, that I think it proper to categorize the Dharmashastric literature as ethico-legal in nature, where the ethical and legal aspects are entangled together in such a manner that it gets difficult to view them as separate entities. This ethico-legal nature is further exemplified in the discussion which we find in these texts of penance and punishment, where the two are seen as interacting and sometimes overlapping categories. My aim here is to account for this relation by seeing it in connection with the maintenance of gender and caste hierarchy. Now, this study is based on a critical reading of what are popularly known as the staple texts of historians of early India, that is, texts belonging to the Dharmashastric corpus of literature, namely the four extant Dharma Sutras of Apastam, Bodhayan, Vashisht, and Gautam, and the Manav Dharma Shastra, or what is commonly known as Manusmriti. The age and authorship of these normative and instructional texts is a matter of intense debate among historians, with some even raising concerns over their very use for historical reconstruction, given the anonymity behind their authorship and the biases that they reflect. However, a mere dismissal of their norms as regressive and biased takes away a valuable source of understanding history and the authoritative or widely circulated opinions on diverse matters in early India. Although composed by and addressed primarily to a Brahmin male, these texts propose beliefs, principles, and ideals for both males and females of other castes too, sometimes in relation to and at other times even independently of the Brahmin male. Moreover, the Shastras are also a valuable source of history because of their very flexible nature, where they respond to the changing needs of society. The composition of texts used for this analysis extends over a large span of time, roughly from c. 6th century BCE to the 1st to 2nd century CE. Historically, this was a period of significant changes in the entire socio-political and economic setup of the Indian subcontinent, with the growth of more complex political entities in the form of kingdoms and the emergence of towns and cities in the Indo-Gangetic plain. All these changes had far-reaching implications too, as they led to the emergence of new socio-economic divisions, preparing the ground for the emergence of a literary tradition which explicitly lays down the rights, duties, and privileges of the various sections in society, in turn legitimizing the hierarchy. Now, the Dharma Shastras have extensively attracted the attention of numerous scholars over the past few decades. The several smritis and their commentaries have been primarily used as source material to understand and elaborate upon the various facets of Indian law, past and present. Scholars like P.V. Karne, Ram Mohan Das, Shukla Das, R.P. Das Gupta, Haripada Chakrabarti, and others have undertaken a fairly detailed analysis of crime and punishment in early India. One common thing in almost all these writings is that they emphasize the dynamic role played by Varna or caste in the determination of crime and the severity of punishment. However, there are also several other factors which played a crucial role here, as the composers of these texts advise a king to take into account variables like the learning of the offender and the victim, his or her mental condition, age, sex, physical condition, social status, the time and place where the crime occurred, and its frequency. More so, while determining punishments for sexual crimes, the central analytical axis of my argument, both the caste and gender of the offender and the victim is taken into consideration, as this analysis will further reveal. Recently, Patrick Olivelle, in his thought-provoking article, Penance and Punishment, Marking the Body in Criminal Law and Social Ideology of Ancient India, has argued that the twin systems of penance and punishment as found in the Dharma Shastras target the body of the criminal, marking it in ways similar to the marking of the body by the rebirth process within the ideology of karmic retribution. Thus, in turn, seeing the entire justice system as anchored in the working of cosmic law, and therefore beyond the contingency of human laws, norms, and judgments. My own analysis, however, diverts a great deal from this argument, as I picture the tenets of the justice system not to be connected with some divine law alone, but something which is rooted in the very social fabric of the times, further legitimizing the hierarchical ordering of individuals and groups. Crime is generally defined as the violation of rules and regulations of a particular society. A person who goes against the established norms and behaviors enforced by the state or other authoritative elements within society is believed to have committed a crime. At the same time, crime is a relative term. As to what is considered a crime differs when we move from one region and time period to another. Therefore, it would be correct to say that the concept of crime and theories of punishment are constructed keeping in mind the social, moral, psychological, and other needs of the society to which the given laws apply. Deriving from Ahuja's clear distinction between the legal and social aspects of crime, where from the legal viewpoint, crime is a violation of legal tenets, and from the social viewpoint, it is the motivated deviation from the conduct norms of instructional groups. Here I focus on the norms which define social conduct as transgression from those amounted to the commission of a criminal activity. It is inevitable to discuss punishment when we talk about crime, as punishment is the action a society or an appointed individual takes against a person who transgresses from a legal tenet or norm. Daṇḍa, the Sanskrit term for punishment, means a stick, staff, or rod, coincidentally all symbols of authority and control. Glucklich has depicted that Daṇḍa in early India denoted a range of things, from the simple stick to the complex concept of legal punishment. The idea of Daṇḍa or punishment evolved over a period of time. The early Dharma Sutras contain a long list of crimes against individuals and society at large, but interestingly, these texts do not always impose a strict dividing line between sins and punishable offenses. Gautam discusses the origin of the word Daṇḍa from Daman or restraint. As we move from the sutras to the shastras, one witnesses a shift in the conceptualization of criminal laws and rules of penance, where they are portrayed as increasingly distinct entities. Additional responsibility is added to the shoulders of the king and the state, who now play an active role in the protection of the subjects by punishing those indulging in unlawful activities. Manu addresses the king as Daṇḍidhar, one whose duty it was to protect the people and maintain law and order, and argues that it was for him that the Lord created his son, punishment. This is again related to the ideals of kingship developing in those times, where the ruler was increasingly seen as the protector of the people. The king was in fact advised to direct his maximum effort constantly at the eradication of thorns, that is, the suppression of those indulging in criminal activities, as that guaranteed the attainment of the highest heaven for himself. Manu even goes to the extent of anthropomorphizing punishment as the Lord's son, dark-hued Shyamu and red-eyed Lohitakshu, which comes to the king's rescue in disciplining and protection of the subjects and is physically inflicted by him after careful examination. Infliction of just punishment was therefore crucial here, as it affects the king and the prosperity of his reign as well. The concept of sin, on the other hand, goes back to the Rig Veda in the Indian context. In this text, it is associated with gods like Varun, the Adityas, and Aditi, and is seen as a disease which can be banished by spells. Water may wash it away, and fire burn it away. It is interesting to note that these factors remain an integral part of the Prāyaścitta ritual in the Shastras as well. Like a disease, it is external and therefore can be cured. And unlike crime, the commission of a sin is not always intentional on the part of the sinner. It can also be inherited from father or uncle. Taking this conception of sin forward, the composers of Dharma texts put forward the doctrine of Prāyaścitta or penance, which by this time is tilted more towards the reformation of an individual in contrast to compensation towards society. The term Prāyaścitta has also had more than one connotation. Initially used to signify the commission of an act which would obviate any untoward or accidental happening during the performance of a sacrifice, Prāyaścitta was primarily used for expiation or atonement for errors in the performance of sacrifices or rituals. In the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras, however, Prāyaścitta is undertaken for neutralizing the consequences of Mahapataks, mortal sins, and Anupataks, minor sins. A range of moral or ethical wrongdoings are added to the list of acts that require the performance of penance, which by this time is increasingly associated with self-torture or bodily mortification. The performance of penance in the Dharma Sutras and the Manav Dharma Shastra involves fasting, taking of hot liquids, regulated intake of small quantities of food, and other forms of physical austerities like remaining immersed in water for a whole day or night, or passing the day standing and the night in a sitting posture. The performance of a penance signifies voluntary acknowledgement of wrongdoing on the part of the sinner, whereas punishment is something which is inflicted on the criminal after careful examination of a range of factors by the authorities. Another distinguishing feature between these two doctrines is that penance is seldom performed in front of a large gathering, even though the acknowledgement may take a public role sometimes, but the procedure prescribed is like a private, personal journey towards atonement. Penances can therefore be performed even while keeping it a secret from the people. Punishments, on the other hand, were devised as an effective means of deterrence. An exemplary punishment served as a warning to all the others who might be tempted to commit such a crime, thereby inflicted in public spaces in front of large gatherings. The point where both these ideas converge is in how they interact with the categories of gender and caste. Having explicated a brief history and development of the doctrines of Daṇḍa and punishment, I would now like to depict how and in what ways they interacted with the two prominent social categories of gender and caste in early India by focusing upon the rules of penance and punishment with respect to sexual offenses. Within the purview of sexual crimes, the Dharma texts generally include adultery and sexual assault against both men and women. The authors prescribe punishments for such offenses, keeping in mind several factors like willingness or unwillingness on the part of the woman, varna of the offender and the victim, civil condition of the woman, her guarded or unguarded status, who initiates the act, and the personal merits of those involved. For sexual misconduct or intercourse with a young woman, for example, Apastambha orders the banishment and confiscation of the property of a young man, whereas his penis should be cut off along with the testicles if he deliberately indulges in such behavior with another man's wife. The women, on the other hand, in both these cases are advised to perform expiation in the presence of their guardians. Gautam in this regard states that if a Shudra has sex with an Arya woman, his penis should be cut off and all his property should be confiscated, or he shall be executed if the woman had a guardian too. In case of women, sex with a low caste man resulted in her fall from caste. For adultery, the punishment is less severe if a man has sex once with a married woman of his own class, where for each repetition, 1/4 of a punishment is added. But an Arya who has sex with a Shudra woman should be banished, while a Shudra who has sex with an Arya woman should be executed. Bodhayan also believes that it is beneficial for women to remain faithful towards their husbands, for they are required to perform the arduous penance if they deviate from this path. The penance also depends on the varna of her lover, as it becomes more stringent as we move from a Kshatriya to a Shudra. Twice-born male offenders of adultery should perform penance for a year, whereas a guilty Shudra man should be burnt with a straw fire. Manu includes adultery in the category of secondary sins causing loss of caste and prescribes lunar penance for incestuous union and Santapana for unnatural sex, respectively. Further, a Brahman's indulgence in sexual relations with a Chandala or the lowest born woman was considered a sin which resulted in a loss of caste for him. Similarly, a twice-born incurs a huge sin by having sex with a Shudra woman, and he can only remove it by living on alms food for 3 years and performing soft recitations every day. Like other grave crimes, the Dharma texts prescribe penances alongside severe punishments like mutilation and death for sexual offenders too. However, these two overlapping categories undergo a slight differentiation here, as in case of punishment, it was a responsibility of the king or a group of learned men, that is Parishad, to decide the fate of the offender, keeping in mind the severity of the offense and the social position of the offender vis-a-vis the victim. On the other hand, penance is something which a person is responsible to perform on his own with little or no external influence. But for an adulterous wife to redeem herself of wrongdoings, the penance was to confine herself in a single room or the performance of an arduous or lunar penance. This process, however, was supposed to take place in the supervision of her husband. As Manu in this regard says, and I quote, "The husband should keep an adulterous wife confined in a single room and make her perform the observance prescribed for a man who has sex with another man's wife," unquote. Thus, in case of women, especially adulterous wives, a husband is given the authority to supervise the performance of a penance, whereas for males, no such supervision is required by any external authority, and therefore expiation, in contrast to punishment, remains a private secret affair. Only under exceptional circumstances, when a person's crime has been made public, should he perform a penance laid down by the Parishad. Otherwise, even the performance of a secret penance will do the needful. Michel Foucault, in his much acclaimed work Discipline and Punish, talks about the 1830s in Paris as an age of sobriety in punishment. As with the development of the prison, the horrific spectacles of physical punishment came to be replaced by the ordered world of the prison. According to Foucault, the aim here was not to torment the flesh, but to reach beyond the body, to correct, reclaim, and cure the soul of the prisoner. Interestingly, as the present analysis reveals, centuries before the development of prisons in the Western world, both the physical infliction of severe punishment and the idea to reform the soul through penances exist simultaneously. While it was the king's responsibility to ensure the infliction of just punishment, the correction of soul was largely an individual's personal sphere, at least for a major part of the population. In conclusion, the idea of physical infliction of severe punishment, severe and more public punishments, that is Daṇḍa, carefully governed by the state or ruling authority, and the reformation of soul through ritualistic and private penances, that is Prāyaścitta, exists simultaneously in early Sanskrit Dharma texts. This is indicative of the fact that the ancient Indian lawgivers tended to draw a distinction between compensation towards society and the reformation of an individual, and emphasize the idea of one's moral duty towards society at large. However, it is interesting to note that one's actions and the repercussions within this ethical universe were further defined by two prominent social constructs of the time, that is gender and caste. In fact, the neatly created concepts of Daṇḍa and Prāyaścitta did undergo some changes or modifications too, based on the caste and biological sex of the offender as well as the victim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aradhana, for also finishing it within your 20 minutes time.